Grace Fryer's teeth were falling out. Her jawbone was dissolving. Not from infection, not from decay. From inside the bone itself. And at night, her body glowed, not as a figure of speech, in real life. A faint, pale light emanating from her skin, her hair, her clothing, visible to anyone who passed her on the street. She had walked home glowing every evening for years. She was 25 years old. She thought it was beautiful once. Factories are not supposed to make their workers glow in the dark. Her doctor's report listed the cause of her deterioration as syphilis. That word followed her name into every official record. She did not have syphilis. What Grace had was a job. Orange, New Jersey, 1917. The United States Radium Corporation was hiring young women for precise, well-paid work. Steadier hands, better eyesight, faster fingers than men. The factory floor at 35 Alden Street smelled of paint and metal and industrial solvent, and the tables were covered in small glass bottles of a luminous compound that glowed faintly even in daylight. There was a waiting list to get hired. The pay was better than laundry, better than domestic service, better than the garment factories further north. Some of the women were teenagers. Most were supporting families. The work was considered skilled. They painted numbers onto watch dials. The paint contained radium. Because the brushes needed a very fine tip, the supervisors had a technique. Dip, lip, paint. Press the brush between your lips. Roll it to a point, apply to the dial, repeat. Each woman did this thousands of times per shift. Every time they did it, they swallowed a little radium. At the end of the day, they walked home glowing, radium traces on their skin, their hair, their clothes, faintly luminous in the dark. They called themselves the Ghost Girls. One woman painted her teeth before a date so her smile would glow. They were told the paint was harmless. And here is the thing about that. Radium had been discovered in 1898 by Marie and Pierre Curie. By 1917, it was fashionable. Face creams, health tonics, radium-injected spa water. The glow meant vitality. The element that made you luminous made you more alive. So nobody questioned it. Not at first. But the company's own chemists, the ones handling radium in the laboratory upstairs, wore lead aprons. They used tongs. They were strictly forbidden from putting anything near their mouths when radium was present. The women on the factory floor were told to use their lips. The body cannot distinguish radium from calcium. When it enters the bloodstream, the body processes it identically, pulls it out of circulation, and deposits it in the bones. And there it stays. Radium has a half-life of 1,600 years. Once lodged in the skeleton, it does not leave. It emits radiation continuously from inside for the rest of a person's life. The bone tissue surrounding it begins to die. The marrow breaks down. The jaw, dense with bone, one of the first accumulation sites, begins to hollow from within. Teeth loosen, fall out. Then the jaw itself develops cavities, fractures, holes. They would come to call it radium jaw. By 1922, the cases were accumulating. Molly Maggia, 24 years old, factory floor, Orange, New Jersey, died that September. Her attending physician removed her jawbone during a late-stage examination, not with instruments, with his bare hands. Her death certificate listed the cause as syphilis. The women kept painting. In 1924, the United States Radium Corporation commissioned a Harvard researcher named Cecil Drinker to study conditions at the Orange factory. He found radioactive dust on every surface. Radium in the workers' hair, their skin, their breath. Contamination levels consistent with the symptoms the women were already displaying. He recommended immediate safety reforms. The company altered his report before submitting it to regulators, rewrote the findings. When Drinker discovered the alteration and reported it, the company denied everything. This is the pivot. Because up to this point, a viewer might believe what the workers themselves believed, that this was a tragedy rooted in ignorance, that nobody knew, that radium's dangers were invisible and the harm was accidental. The altered drinker report ends the idea that this was ignorance. They knew. They had the data in hand. They rewrote it. And they kept the women painting. This was not negligence. It was a decision. By 1925, Grace Fryer wore a back brace to stand upright. X-rays showed dark voids where solid bone should have been. She wanted to sue. New Jersey's statute of limitations on workplace injury was 2 years from first exposure, a window designed for acute injuries, a fall, a chemical burn, something immediate and visible. Radium poisoning took years to surface. By the time a woman's jaw began to dissolve, the legal clock had already run out. Every attorney Grace approached understood this. Every one declined. United States Radium Corporation was large, well-funded, and had already demonstrated it would alter scientific reports and co-opt physicians. Representing 5 dying women against them was not an attractive case for any firm in New Jersey. Grace spent 2 years being told no. In 1927, a Newark attorney named Raymond Berry agreed to take it. He filed suit on behalf of Grace and 4 other women, Catherine Schaub, Edna Hussman, Quinta McDonald, and Albina Larice. All 5 were severely ill by the time the case was filed. The company's legal response was immediate: delay until they died, continuance after continuance, procedural challenge after challenge. The case moved slowly through 1927 and into 1928, while the women deteriorated. April 1928. Grace Fryer could not raise her arm to take the oath. A court clerk had to lift it for her. Catherine Schaub arrived in a wheelchair. Photographs of the 5 women at trial ran in newspapers across the country. Young, carefully dressed, visibly dying. The images broke through in a way no scientific report had. People could see what the company had spent years insisting was not happening. Judge William Clark called the delay tactics unconscionable and pressed the company to settle. In June 1928, they did. Each woman received $10,000, annual payments of $600 for life, medical expenses covered. Most of them were dead within a few years. The precedent set by the New Jersey case and a parallel lawsuit in Ottawa, Illinois in the 1930s are in every law school curriculum that covers occupational disease. Before these cases, employers were largely shielded from liability for slow harm. Acute injury was compensable, chronic poisoning was not. After the settlements, the legal framework began to shift. Corporations could be held responsible for exposure to dangerous substances, even when the harm took years to manifest. The modern concept of occupational safety liability runs through a factory floor in Orange, New Jersey. Grace Fryer died in 1933. She was 35. Decades later, researchers exhumed some of the women's remains to study long-term radium exposure. Geiger counters held near the skeletal remains registered elevated radiation readings. The glow the women had walked home with every evening, the light they had thought was harmless, even beautiful, had never left their bodies. It had simply moved inside. The Radium girls were not an accident. They were the result of a company that possessed the scientific findings, weighed them against revenue, and chose revenue. Physicians who filed false diagnoses, attorneys who deployed delay as a mortality strategy, regulators who received an altered report and did not investigate the alteration. Nobody made a single decision to poison 25-year-old women. They made a series of smaller decisions: to not warn, to falsify, to wait. The catastrophe was assembled out of ordinary choices made by ordinary people inside a system that rewarded them for making those choices and held no one responsible for the result. Factories are not supposed to make their workers glow in the dark, but this one did. Next, on Lore&Ruin. The Radium girls were poisoned because no one had written a rule against it yet. But not every story of institutional failure involves poison or factories. In 1726, a woman in rural England made a claim so disturbing that it reached the King's Court, divided the medical establishment, and forced an entire profession to ask how it had been so thoroughly deceived. The answer is more unsettling than the claim itself. Subscribe, and you'll be there when it drops.